Welcome to the Redline Podcast, featuring co-presenters Bo, the Banksy of LinkedIn and founder at Javelin Content Management, Shane, CEO at Sales Driven, and Antoine, co-founder at Sales Driven, master of storytelling. Each week we will bring you advice, tips, and thoughts about sales, leadership, and share our experience on growing an effective business. Meet guests, enjoy the stories, and most importantly, have fun. This is Redline.
Right. And welcome to another episode of Redline Podcast. God, I feel like we've been doing this for about a year, Antoine. I feel like it's just been non-stop recording. This is our second episode. This week. I am shattered from recording all these. Do you know what? It's amazing fun. And we've had some amazing guests already, not to be pipped by the one and only Todd Caponi, who joins us today. Todd, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. This is going to be fun. If it's anything like our other conversations, this should be a blast.
Yeah. So a little bit of potted history for me. So I used to run, and I still do, another podcast, which is more of a live event, I guess, in the customer experience and customer service space. EOA would agree. So those of you following along have probably seen me talking about that some time ago. Todd was the first guest to make a double appearance on the show because it was so great the first time. When he released his new book, I had to have him back on. And so, yeah, if you don't know Todd, where the hell have you been? Sincerely, go give Todd a follow on LinkedIn. Todd is, and I'm sure he'll tell us all about it in a moment, he's a sales historian and nerd geek and all of the above by nature. And I love his posts, has his own podcast, and is a celebrated author as well. And I have to say, Todd, I've read both books and I'm a big, big fan.
Thank you.
It's always telling when somebody writes a book that I read and that starts to permeate into not just what it was intended for, but I can extrapolate that into other things that we do. And so much of what you said has ended up impacting my life in a really positive way that, like, you know, it's been, I know it's
Beautiful.
but I sincerely, it's been transformational do you know what? There's nothing complicated in the book, and it probably underpins a lot of stuff that everybody already knows and just makes it simple and obvious to people and explains it in a way that we can all get. So if you haven't read it yet, I'm sure most people who are watching this have. If you haven't yet, you definitely need to read those books. Because Todd, I've interviewed you twice already, I feel like we're all friends now. Antoine, I'm going to hand things over to you to kind of chat through with Todd.
Todd, I've followed your LinkedIn for a long time now, read The Transparent Sales Leader. I think for me, definitely in terms of voices on LinkedIn, one of the most authentic voices that actually post and kind of shares their story about sales and, you know, where sales is headed based on where it's actually been before. So tons of questions from me and just loads of curiosity about kind of, you know, your kind of perspective and your viewpoint on where sales is at today, how it drives businesses, and actually what you've learned from sales yesteryear that actually we should be looking at and saying, okay, well, we need to avoid that, or we should still be doing that, or that still makes an impact on why we lost it. So I think maybe kind of leading into this, Todd, for those that don't know you, is there a quick, maybe 30 seconds that you can give everybody about you?
Yeah, you guys kind of nailed it, but I joked that I was kind of like a B minus sales rep. I had a couple of great years. Like in 1999, I did 800% of my target. And then I thought my shit didn't stink. Like I was like, you know, big head Todd. And then I realized I really didn't know anything. Because in 1999, I was working for SAP, which is like working at a drive-through window where cars would just pull up and throw money in the window. I always knew though that my jam was, I've always been a nerd. I've always found it really interesting to understand how individuals make decisions, how we optimize for learning, and then teaching. And so over time, I've worked my way into leadership roles. And then 5 years ago, like a lunatic, I quit my job to write the first book based on a revelation around decision-making that became The Transparency Scale. I thought the book would suck because I'd never written a book before. And my sophomore English teacher in high school told me that I couldn't write. But It took on a life of its own. And now I'm running a whole business where I'm teaching, doing keynotes around decision making structures for salespeople to think about how to optimize that and use that information for good, not evil. And then the new book, The Transparent Sales Leader, is really the framework or structure for sales leadership on a bed of transparency, all optimized by science. So books, speaking, doing workshops for companies. And then I do all of this because, not for the money, although it's bad. I do it because I believe sales is a profession that we should be proud of when we look at it through the lens of it being a service profession. Human beings don't make decisions when they're convinced, or if they do, they're pissed about it. We make decisions when we can predict. And when we come at it from that lens, that service mindset, not only do we win, our income does better, our wallets become fuller, but we make the world better for other people, which it turns out transparency sells better than perfection. And so I'm trying to just spread the good word.
That's awesome. Thanks for that, Todd. So I think that then allows me to kind of expand on some of those responses that you've given. So where do you feel then for sellers today, people that are even being brought into startup businesses, or they've been brought into established companies where the framework's all set out, everything's laid out. Where do you think the biggest friction for them is in being able to find and deliver their best selves to their prospects and their customers? It's something that I kind of grappled with over the years, why some people do very well and some people don't. Some people are very open, some people are very closed. Where do you think the biggest friction lies for them?
So, there's a guy that I knew forever, and he's, we're all old enough now where we've got kids that are in college. And he was like, "Hey, could you talk to my son? My son's trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life. He's a sophomore at university." And so I talked to him last night, and I was asking him, like, "What do you think you want to do?" And so he mentioned some things like, "I love business, I love finance, I love like," and I was like, "Have you thought about selling as a profession?" And he's like, "Not really." And I asked him why. And there's still this permeating perception that sales is gross,
Yeah.
right? I remember when I met my wife, we started dating, and she told her sister that, "Hey, I'm dating this guy." And she's like, "What does he do?" And she said, "Well, he's in sales." And her response was, "Ugh, gross." Right? Like that's still that perception. So we get people that come out of college and enter this profession that still think that sales is about being slimy and you got to get a plaid jacket and some gold chains and grease all over everybody. And that's where I'm really trying to get not only organizations, individuals to think. Again, there's a guy, like sales history nerdiness coming through here. I believe he is the GOAT of sales philosophers, greatest of all time, Arthur Sheldon. He wrote a book in 1911 called The Art of Selling. And he's got a quote in it that I just hold near and dear to my heart. And the quote is this: "True salesmanship is the science of service. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go." All the way to like 1916, where the first World Sales Congress, or the first conference of its type, 3,000 attendees in Detroit, Michigan, here in the US. The motto of the whole conference was service. It's a sales conference, service. What do I mean by service? It means that our role as selling professionals is meant to be a service to customers where we're helping them predict. We're doing the homework for them. We are helping them achieve outcomes, whether it's with us or with somebody else, and doing that as quickly as possible. The best thing you can do is win. The second best thing you can do is lose quickly and guide the customer to achieving their outcomes and move on. I think that's where so many of us get stuck is, and I'll tell you one other little quick story. I was talking to a client. Economy's not the greatest, right? Big news. I was telling them about this idea of, hey, listen, like sometimes when I get an inbound lead and it's not a match, I own that. And I'm like, hey, listen, I could teach that if you make a list of the top 50 people that do that kind of thing, I'd come in at about number 47. Can I actually refer you to the people that I think are number 1, 2, and 3 on that? Because they're going to be able to do a much better job. So I said that. I looked in the chat and somebody wrote, "No," right? Like all O's. And I was like, all right, like, let's talk about that No. And they're like, hey, listen, when the economy is like this, we got to grasp onto anything, like any revenue we can get right now. I'm like, no, because that one deal you're going to win in this world where the proliferation of reviews and feedback and connecting with peers is so readily available, you're going to win that one deal, but lose 4 or 5 deals you didn't even know existed because they're not calling you anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's about embracing transparency, building trust, providing a service to customers. If we all come in with that mindset, your sellers, your early stage founders, everybody wins. And that's where you grow and customers buy, stay, buy more, and become advocates for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Some really interesting points there, and some good stories as well, actually. The point about where somebody said no because you got to hang on to everything, I think that's quite pervasive in the mindset of a lot of sellers and a lot of companies. So when you're teaching people about how to really be more transparent, you know, do you see it as that's really a top down kind of attitude where that's pushed through any organization and that permeates through to the sales teams, or that people are coming in and that's automatically, they just soak up that culture and that's the way that they tend to behave?
Yeah. I mean, it starts with leadership. So little argument I just had with somebody an hour ago on a webinar. They were talking about building funnel, building pipeline, right? And like this old axiom that like, hey, sellers at all times, you got to have 4x your quota in pipeline, right? And like, we keep hearing that. And so the leaders look at that and go, oh, God, I got to measure it, man. And then they walk around the sales floor and they're like, where's your 4x? When we do that, we're actually creating an environment where our reps are filling their pipeline with 4x their quota, filled with garbage.
Yeah.
Right. And because, hey, that's the metric. And as a result, we're losing slowly. Everybody, your most valuable asset of all the products, services, everything you sell, the most valuable asset you have to convert to revenue is your time. Every lead has a cost, right? And so we've got to permeate that from the top down that, again, number one, win. Number two is lose quickly, right? So that we can find more opportunities that we should be working on where we can help them achieve their outcomes. That starts from the top. But then as an individual rep or individual contributor, you got to be thinking that way too, and bring that upwards that, hey, listen, it's never going to be any earlier than it is right now. We've got to get out of this deal. And then the other funny thing about that though, is even like that story I told you about that client where they were looking for something I don't do. I gave them like, I'm 47th on the list. Guess what happened? I referred them to the people that could help them with that. But the conversation immediately switched to, so where's your area of focus? What? And I was like, well, based on your outcomes and what you're trying to achieve, here's what I do. And it's not the traditional stuff. And we're about to sign that deal. Right. So again, transparency begets transparency. It builds trust. And when you build that kind of a relationship right from the beginning, you're going to find that even when you refer out, they're either going to refer you back in or they're going to find another area in the organization where you can help. That happens 9 out of 10 times, and the 1 out of 10 time that it doesn't. Cool. I get to work on something else.
I think this like I took a lot away from that when we've spoke before, and it's something that I've kind of, I've brought into a couple of businesses now, that time to lose metric. How long? And I can't find a single person who could disagree with me that it's a good metric, right? Why are we wasting time on stuff that isn't going to convert? But equally, and there's a lead in here. So equally, marketing get a similar sort of problem, is they get targeted on MQLs. MQLs don't drive business. Converted leads drive business. So all that happens is you get to the end of the month, and exactly like salespeople, and this is why I love it so much, it's exactly like salespeople. You get to the end of the month, oh, we haven't got any MQLs this week. Well, I'm going to release a white paper. I'm going to get a load of my friends to sign up for it, and their MQLs, because they signed up for the paper, put their details into. Like, no, you're just going to create problems down your pipeline. So the point I'm getting to with this, Todd, is, and I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this, is how intertwined do you see sales and marketing in the current day? Because having stepped across from sales into marketing myself, I know what my answers are going to be, but I'm keen to hear what your experience is.
Yeah. And back to Antoine's message about top-downism too. that like we need to create environments where losing is embraced. Right. And I know that sounds crazy. And I had a leader in a multi-billion-dollar company that was, we're creating a culture of losers. Like, no, no, no. I'm not saying that we do that, but you've got to celebrate the losses for the effort, but the lessons that can be learned. And what I mean by that is when we celebrate for the lessons that can be learned from those things and allow an environment where our reps feel okay with saying, hey, I didn't see this and I should have, or I wish I would have pivoted here. I wish I would have done this different. We stop making the same mistakes over and over again. But to your point, Paul, we start to see trends. We start to see firmographic and demographic trends around the companies that we're dealing with and the individuals and levels and titles and roles and responsibilities that we're dealing with so that we can get much more targeted. Another conversation I had with a client last week was, hey, it was exactly what you just said, Paul. They said their win rate is going down, right? In this environment, they're winning a lower percentage of their deals. So to your point, they're like, we got to put more in the top then. Like, no, you don't. We've got to investigate the why. Like, why are we losing more? And then can we spot trends? And then here's just an idea for everybody, regardless what your total addressable market is, right? When things get tight, we tend to want to cast a wider net. I'm an advocate of doing the exact opposite. I call it practicing extreme firmographic focus, but it means doing sprints around firmographic details like verticals, company sizes, maybe doing sprints around individual titles or roles where you learn everything you can about. Like it was something that we had done at a company of mine back in the late 2000s, so 2009, 2010, where we started seeing momentum around aerospace and defense. So I was like, hey, we hired a consultant that could teach our team all about it, right? Like who are the people that matter? What do they care about? How are they measured? What do they read? Like, where do they learn? Where do they go to get smarter? What does their inbox even look like? And then we did case studies for our current customers in that space. And the next thing you know, we did this for like 4 weeks. My team, they woke up every morning wanting to prioritize those. They had confidence that they could have really strong conversations with these individuals. Next thing you know, we got Boeing, we got Gulfstream, we got Cessna. And then we were like, all right, let's go out a little bit from there. And this is 2008, 2009, Great Recession, right? We grew 400% year over year. We grew 400% year over year the next year. And then we exited the business to SAP in 2011, right? So think about that it's not about, hey, we need more because our ratios are going down. Investigate why you lose. Look at that idea of time to loss and see if, hey, listen, instead of 4x our quota in pipeline, could we actually hit our targets with 2x and just be really smart about opportunities we're going after? And gosh, if we got to 4x, it means 200% of our target instead of 100%.
That's so interesting. And for me, then, I think the nature of CEOs and, company founders, company leaders is do everything fast, very, very quickly, do more of it to see more results, whether that's because you've got profits going to shareholders, profits going into the coffers of directors, whatever that might be. There's an ultimate drive or ambition that they have to be able to see that increase in that growth in their business. Ultimately, I feel that a lot of the time that pressure being pushed down onto the sales team is what then allows for them to create stories or create results that aren't true because they're trying to live up to something that they don't believe or see as possible, but they have to keep up and maintain that kind of vision of the company so that A, they keep their job, and that B, they're able to kind of somewhat, give themselves a reason for being paid. What have you seen with your kind of historical facts of how businesses used to build versus how they build today? Is it quite cyclical in that approach, or do you think that there's lessons that can be learned from how companies built their teams back in the day to how they're doing so now?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. Like we could do a whole podcast episode on that topic alone. But yeah, there's things that they did right that we do wrong. There's certainly things they did wrong that we do right today. But, from that perspective, there's one thing that really jumps out at me. I believe we do wrong today, and it has to do a lot with those metrics that you're talking about too. Um, do you guys remember the movie Glengarry Glen Ross,
Cool.
1990s, right? And Alec Baldwin, he's Mitch and Murray. He like comes in, he's got his chalkboard, and he's got ABC on it,
Yeah.
and then he's got something AIDA. And for anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, just go to YouTube and go, Glengarry Glen Ross scene, and that will likely be the one that pops up. The AIDA, right? That was one thing that he got right. And AIDA means attention. Like, do I have the customer's attention? The I is interest. Like, are they interested? The D is desire. Like, have we generated a desire for them to do something? And then A is action. Now, in the movie, the D was decision. He got that part wrong. The reason I bring that story is that in 1898, there's a guy named Elias St. Elmo Lewis that theorized AIDA as the journey that every single buyer goes through to make a decision. Now, what's interesting about that AIDA is it was about recognizing buyer behavior, right? Like, is the buyer paying attention? Are they interested? Have they generated a desire? And are they ready to take action? That became the basis for every sales process and every sales forecasting methodology through at least the 1930s that I could find. Now, even in 1925, there was a guy named Ellsworth Ferris, wrote a book, and in it, he talked about the sales process, and he was like, I'm not going to bother talking about AIDA because everybody knows that's it, right? And like, it became so pervasive, and it's in every book. Fast forward to today. I want you all to think about your sales processes. I want you all to think about the stages that are in your CRM. They're probably things like qualification, discovery, demo, send a proposal, negotiate, all things that we're doing. And as a result, you are subconsciously forcing your team to recognize their own behaviors versus recognizing the buyer behavior. First of all, no freaking wonder we can't forecast accurately, right? That we're not actually thinking about what the buyer's doing. Hey, we need to forecast when the buyer's going to buy. So let's measure what we're doing. That's stupid, right? AIDA was the original buyer-centric process and forecasting methodology, and poof, it's gone. Like, nobody does that anymore. And so, like, that was something that we did. My last company, I was the CRO of a company called Power Reviews, where we had a buyer-centric sales process. We had our stages. I wasn't going to blow those up. My CEO would have killed me. But over the top, we didn't overlay AIDA. We overlaid a different one, which was essentially the 3 whys, which is why change? Like, does a customer recognize that they should be doing something different tomorrow than they're doing today? Why us versus the alternatives of fixing that? And then why now? 2 things happened. A forecast got real accurate. It was amazing. Like, it was insane how more accurate. But the number 2 thing is that we attuned our whole organization to get their endorphin rushes from watching the buyer proceed through their journey versus watching us send a proposal or us negotiate or qualify an opportunity. And as a result, our relationships became stronger with our customers, and we were able to differentiate in the way that we sold. So that's just like, that's a rant, but it really speaks to this idea that we all say that, yeah, we're buyer centric, but all of our processes and systems reinforce and create endorphin rushes around seller activity. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to change that.
That's amazing. I love that answer. It's a very interesting response. So something that I find really interesting about sales today. I mean, I'm definitely a student of sales. I was becoming more and more curious about it by the day. Lots of these books that definitely give you an insight into, the 1 Minute Manager books, for example. There's something that were brought to my attention when I started leading the sales teams. And I just find it fascinating how, from, 20, 30 years ago, some of those practices are still so relevant today. Do you feel that salespeople are being given enough of the things that did work and really well and why they worked in their kind of sales training? Or do you think it's all just very much fine-tuned to today's standards and all of that kind of good stuff has been lost in a way?
I actually think, so one area that I've been studying more of, and you'll probably start seeing me publish some more content around is just, gosh, when I got promoted into sales leadership the first time, right? So exciting. But then the next thing I knew is I felt like I was a dog chasing a car down the street every day, right? Like I was out of control. And that's how most of us move into leadership is we're not trained. We're not given a framework. We're not given a structure. I created one that became the basis for the newish book, The Transparent Sales Leader. But there's two things that I don't think leaders are being taught. And number one is what I call the science of intrinsic inspiration, right? Like, do you really know typically what drives people to show up, stay, do their best and advocate, right? I don't think we're being taught that enough. I've got a whole model in the book about that I think is, again, the axiom is if you think your sales reps are coin operated, you're right, but that also means you're doing it wrong. Right. And so we need to take a look and figure out how do we create an environment where we're intrinsically inspired and our team is intrinsically inspired to do their best every day. And variable comp becomes the reward for doing work we love to do, not the reason we do it. All right. So that's part number one. But part number two to your question is who's teaching leaders the science of how we as human beings best learn? Right. Like, I mean, I go into a group of leaders. I'm like, hey, who can explain to me, like, how do you optimally create learning in your teams? And they'll throw some things out there and some are good and some aren't. But we as like the kind of the scientific community, they actually know how human beings best learn. And we're not doing that. So like the content's great, but we're not optimizing for the human brain. And how do we learn? How do we practice? How do we reinforce? And how do we make it a part of us so that when the bullets start flying, we've got that to fall back on versus going, oh, you know what? I think during onboarding 8 months ago, I learned how to negotiate from a former FBI hostage negotiator. That's a side topic. Like what? Like now I have to negotiate. I've forgotten all of it. And I think that's crazy.
I think that's great.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you're talking about, the FBI hostage negotiation, because he's everywhere now, isn't he? Right. So,
well, yeah, that's my side rant is, so much of our current economy is a subscription economy or as a service, like, software as a service, product as a service, all this. The old way of negotiating was always that, right? Like I remember growing up and like there was a 2.5-day class where I'm like looking for eye twitches or, oh, Antoine just touched his nose. He's lying, right? I'm like, that's nuts. I think that, for us to build trust through the sales process, the customer says, yes, I want to buy from you. And then what do? We go, all right, cool. I'm going to start lying to you now. I'm not going to tell you what a good deal is. You're going to have to figure that out. And, like, that's just, and look, again, like I learned everything I know about negotiating from somebody that learned negotiating from the release of hostages from a bank heist. I just think there's such a huge opportunity for us to embrace transparency through negotiating, because not only does it build trust through the goal line, but it makes your deals more valuable, right? When you play your cards out on the table and go, hey, here's what drives our pricing model. And here's the levers that we can exchange to, make sure this is a good deal for both of us. And your deals become more predictable as a result too. So just like that's another opportunity for companies is if we're learning from a book, Chris, if you're listening, don't kill me. Like I know you probably have that ability. But the subheader is, negotiate as though your life depended on it. Cool. If you do get in a situation where you have to release, negotiate the release of hostages, fantastic. But in our worlds, you're not, right? So like embrace transparency and you'll find just massive lifts, not only in them buying, but when they buy more and they renew, the value of the long-term value with that client is going to go through the roof too.
Awesome. Amazing.
I mean, I could ask you 1,000 questions, Todd. I'm not going to lie. There's so much about you that I feel is just so interesting to learn more about. The last question I have, Paul, if I'm allowed to ask you, is just really to understand so there's business leaders listening to this. There's business, owners listening to this, looking at how they can ramp up their sales teams, how they can see more wins, and they're doing so with some of the very methodologies that we've spoken about today.
Well, I
which
think
is
number one thing just for everybody to get stuck into their brains is playing the long game helps you win the short game, right? Like that's like playing the long game will help you win the short game. That's I that's something that I'm seeing like organizations that are getting stuck in this idea that like, hey, we got to win right now. And so like, let's jam in as much as we can and it doesn't matter. Um, and that actually will cause you to lose the long game. When we think about the long game, meaning building strong relationships, building mutual outcomes with clients, embracing transparency. So number one is the long game will help you win the short game too. Number two is that idea of being transparent. And I want all of you to think about this in your own lives. When you buy something that you haven't bought before, that's of medium to high consideration, right? So maybe it's an appliance, maybe it's electronics, maybe it's even clothing or whatever. I bet you, all of you, you read reviews, but you probably read the negative reviews first, don't you? Like that's how we're wired as human beings. We need the negative first. And as it turns out, the data supports this idea that a product on a 5-star scale that has an average review score between a 4.2 and a 4.5, that sells at a higher conversion rate than any other average review score, meaning a product that's got negative reviews right under it sells better than a product that has nothing but perfect 5-star reviews. As a matter of fact, product that's got nothing but perfect 5-star reviews sells at about the same conversion rate as a product that has an average review score of around a 3.25. And that sucks. So if you are presenting your solutions, your products as all things to all people, you're actually making it harder for the customer to buy. You're making it harder for them to predict. And as a result, when they do end up buying, they probably stay less often and they're less likely to advocate. So I know it's hard. I know it hurts, but lead with what you give up to be great at your core. Help customers focus on their outcomes. And the last piece of that is another quote. It's from 1922, The Science of Sales and Advertising, guy named Arthur Dunn. His second favorite quote of all time in sales. If the truth won't sell it, don't sell it. Right? Like just such a compelling thought, but that's the way they thought about it. Now, keep in mind, 100 years ago, sales was still a trusted, respected, and admired profession. They were teaching it in high school, right? Like we're like, hey, why aren't enough colleges teaching sales today? Because nobody wants it, right? It was supply and demand. Back then, there was a demand for this stuff. People saw it as a career where they could make money, but do right. I think we've got an opportunity to get back to that. So play the long game because it helps you win the short game. Transparency sells better than perfection. And due to the proliferation of reviews and feedback, you got to do it anyway today. So embrace that. And always keep in mind, if the truth won't sell it, don't sell it.
Perfect. Amazing end. Love. Todd, I genuinely, I think these conversations just get more and more interesting every time we do them. And really appreciate your time today. And yeah, next time anybody's speaking to Todd, ask him about going around kicking chairs in boardrooms. Very interesting story behind that. We'll leave that for off air, but there's a story there. There's a story there. Fantastic. Great to have you along, Todd. Antoine, thanks for asking us some really cool questions. And we'll see you again next week. Very much.
Thanks, guys. That was fun.